Okay, greetings, party people. This is me, Arcturian. This time I am chilling with my man, Daniel Winters, and I'm very, very glad to have him on my channel. I rarely do interviews. I'm very, very picky, and I want I always say like the elite or those who, like the cracks that really get into the detail of things. And yeah, if you, or however you want to introduce yourself real quick, what you do and what you already have for sale as in gadgets, because I think my people need to know that.
Well, nice to meet you. Thanks for inviting me. I think many of your audience probably know I'm Dan Winter. I do biofeedback, systems analysis with IBM, teach physics of consciousness for 30 years. We have the imploder.com main website, fractalfield.com. My new book just released, Fractal Space-Time, Origin and Cause of Gravity, Negentropy, Perception, and Life Force, all at fractalfield.com. There's a lot there, and we've been teaching science and consciousness for many, many years, and happy to share.
Excellent. So when I listened to your teachings, I got into, most interviewers, they have this general question. I want to really get into detail with you because I find that very, very inspiring. So beginning with what you know, a little bit about your take on human origin, DNA, ETs, Star Wars, Star Trek, based on what? AKA Orion conflict. Where do these storylines for these movie scripts come from? I want the people to really know what you have found, that it's not all movie script.
I had been researching the extraterrestrial origins of DNA for over 20 years. Originally in graduate school, I started the mystery because I realized most every culture on the planet was dominated by fear of women, and I wanted to see where that came from. And I realized the origin of fear of women in culture on this planet came from off-planet. That's my conclusion. And so that's when I came to know and research and know personally most of the people in the field. I knew Alex Collier, the Andromedan, very well. I knew a lot of the people involved in the Montauk Project personally, Al Bielek and all that. I've been very fortunate to know all these people. Robert Morningsky, I knew fairly well. Hopi story, the origin story. And I was trained with indigenous shaman. And anyway, and also I should mention that, I had written my own book on the origins and life of Enki, perhaps before Sitchin, but I think that with my 20 or so years of intense Kundalini experience, it was no coincidence that I sort of focused on the life of Enki as a turning point in the plasma memory of gene pool, only to later discover a relatively similar story in that of Anton Parks, whom I recommend highly. And I have, having studied, concluded that the Anton Parks material on the extraterrestrial Draco-Uru origin of the human gene pool, I think is correct. And in fact, I think his scholarship is much deeper than that of Zachariah Sitchin. So that being said, I don't know if you want a short version of the story, but basically most every tribe on planet Earth that has an ET origin story agrees that the origin was Pleiades. And in fact, the Uru, Draco, Nephilim, Anunnaki culture did come here from Pleiades, although their home star group was probably somewhere in Orion. And we know probably that star enabled them to have an oil lipid-based blood, and they breathed in nitrogen and out cyanogen. They had carbon bones, silicon nerves, and they're relatively poisoned by, for example, water in their food, the origin of kosher. Mm-hmm. And they're also relatively poisoned by oxygen. And after many millennia of cloning only replication, major genetic problems, and also addiction to gold powder, many issues. And so one of their primary issues, as reported widely in the Sumerian, quite correct, was that on arrival here, they began to age catastrophically and indeed required what they called to build a Shem unto the Lord, which means the physics is they build a bioactive electric field, which is time reversing, rejuvenating, and we now know the physics very well. The term Shem unto the Lord was mistranslated or translated by Sitchin after years of study to mean high-word firestone. Of course, he doesn't know what implosive capacitance is, but I do. And so, in fact, the word Shem, which became the word altar in the church, or Shem-on, or schematic, or chemistry and alchemy, means access to the black hole of charge. And that's how you make a bioactive field, and that is currently my specialty as an electrical engineer. I make and build bioactive fields, And the bioactive field of the Priory device, which healed thousands of cases of cancer, and I say healed, documented by the French government. We now have the equations to know how and why it works, and we're building the prototype. And we intend to prove time reversal and bioactive field and rejuvenation field, which is related to my work with the Imploder and agriculture and Purify.com. So it's a big story.
Yeah. Okay. So maybe you can explain you talk about in your teachings about phase conjugation.
I do.
Okay, so the people, my audience, they're not that deep in scientific. How would you explain to them what does that mean when your fractals are in order? When your charge is distributed equally and everything in your body functions, and how if something that is, you'd say, unfractalized, like not in a harmonious fractal order, affects you in a negative way? How would you explain that?
Usually when we talk about conjugating phase, we tell people to visualize how pine cones might kiss noses, which is how you might teach this in phase conjugate optics in a physics class, how the lasers need to converge. But the way to visualize is simply that as waves converge using golden mean ratio in physics, that's called perfect damping or implosion. In mythology, it's called the caduceus. And that adding and multiplying by golden ratio, we prove the way of mathematics to say that that is the maximum possible constructive interference and therefore solution of compression, phase conjugation, and self-organization. What I then went on to discover, and that's all at fractalfield.com, the wave equations, etc., it's the solution of constructive interference. Incidentally, powers of 2 octaves are the opposite. But so we went on to prove that was, and this is the subject of my book, that what is called fractal space-time, which I have proven, I believe, is the cause of gravity, life force, neg entropy, and perception, is that if you take the universal musical key signature of the quantum foam, which is the Planck length and time, and take integer multiples of golden ratio, exact multiples of golden ratio, I prove you get the radii of hydrogen, you get the frequencies of hydrogen, you get the only 2 frequencies that make photosynthesis go, you get virtually exactly the duration of the Earth year and the Venus year, you get the frequencies which are called the Schumann resonance harmonic cascade, which we now know is a phase conjugate pump wave, origin of self-organization, and you get the frequencies of the brain waves that cause peak perception and bliss. In other words, that is what's called fractal, because self-similarity is what golden ratio is, non-destructive compression. So mathematics knew what fractality was, infinite compression, but I'm the first to show what that is as an electric field, and to prove the dimensions, because a lot of people already agree that fractality causes gravity, but I've actually described the dimensions, specifically Planck length and time times golden ratio exponents, of the field that causes gravity, for example, in hydrogen and DNA, etc., and the dodecahedral symmetry of DNA, Earth grid, zodiac, and all that good stuff. So basically, it's just waves adding and multiplying perfectly to produce perfect compression, and therefore centripetal force, and therefore perfective charge distribution, which describes life force and the sacred.
Okay, so I have a question. I had a personal experience years ago where I entered a field where I felt I had to overcome an inner threshold, and it was like utter fear and utter panic, and I felt all my thoughts are attacking me. What I did is I sat it out, I let it happen, and then my body began to realign. I was in a wakeful state. I could connect with the trees, like I could touch a tree and actually download information, go back millions of years, look at templates of light masers connecting in and out, and layers upon layers of history that felt like in seconds rushed in and out of my brain and gave me an overall instantaneous understanding. I think it was faster than telepathy. Do you think that my body was out of phase when I went into the state? I was pulled into the phase, and why that rupturous thing for me? Why is that so hard to come into it, and then after 9 hours I lost it? I couldn't hold it. Why is that?
Well, if you take the electrical geometry of near-death experience, which we now know even the symmetry of, the sequence of visions people see when they die, it's a symmetry operations for DNA doing implosive packing. It's basically what happens to the hero in the movie Powder. The lightning creates charge compression, and the charge compression is information density, which is an introduction to the physics of Kundalini and bliss process. So in other words, I would say you had a short-term bout with Kundalini, And, longer term requires some serious hygiene.
Yes.
I mean, I may be the world's expert on the psychophysiology of Kundalini. I certainly am a survivor of 30 years of intense Kundalini. And, the expert who wrote the book on it, Bentoff, was my mentor, talking about pendulum. So we could talk about the biomechanics of Kundalini, but a short-term bliss experience is literally that, a liquid plasma implosion. It's information dense. And the ability to sustain that is like living inside a lightning bolt when the first thought you have that's not shareable causes it to burn, which is to say, literally, to balance at the center of a lightning bolt, every wave must be shareable, which is similar to saying, if you had one little thought that was pure principle, mm-hmm. you call that eureka and your hair stands up. Mm-hmm. It's because the capacitance was implosive. Now, supposing you were able to think about only pure principle continuously, mm-hmm. you do what biology intended, which was the need to die only occurs because we attempt to store memories which are not shareable. If, in fact, we only thought and dwelt on pure principle, you would attract so much charge, you would never die.
So basically, like you explained in your teachings, is when you are, what do you call that? It's the tip of the wave, like the surfer that has to stay on it in order to stay in the wave. And when you lose that, it catapults you out.
The mechanism of the collective unconscious, the communion of saints, whatever you want to call it, is the physics of what's called a phase conjugate field, which is implosive and centripetal. It's literally what you must enter by compression to survive death, mm-hmm. and to enter a lucid dream. And you do that by entering the center of spin density at the plasma core of the DNA, which then pumps up the spine liquid, energizes the pineal, and you have this conjugate implosion in the brain. And if you know something about the physiology of Kundalini, it's a massive, broad-spectral conjugate experience. It's implosive. It feels like lightning at the tailbone, and we know a lot about the physics.
So does that explain, I don't know if you heard of the story when Napoleon tried to go into the chamber to receive higher knowledge. He got scared shitless and ran out of the pyramid after the visions came in. I'm assuming, I'm aloof here. I'm just going by intuition that he was sitting in a phase conjugate field with a body that was not even trained to sit in that field.
That's right. It's just like entering an extremely sacred space. If your thoughts are not shareable, for example, if you allow unprocessed anger, mm-hmm. then you won't be able to stay centered and on point, and therefore your mentation will speed up, exactly like a phase conjugate dielectric called a gold crown on a king. Mm-hmm. If the king thinks shareable thoughts, it will speed up his mentation. But if he thinks unshareable thoughts, he will go crazy faster. There's a special chamber at Sintra in Portugal, which is a cork Capuchin monastery, where it was famous that the monks would enter, and I felt my Kundalini in a cold, bright rush there, much like the sarcophagus of the pyramid. And that place was so famous for driving people insane that they had a special place to put them. So it is true that it's related to the mummification field. It's related to the Third Eye book about the Russians and the Germans, and they know there's certain caves. So intensely phase conjugate environments are environments where it is a challenge to remain centered, yet at the same time it's extremely bioactive. And that's what our Purify.com technology is. Implosive capacity.
I have an interesting parallel to this driving insane is the storyline with Queen Mary, Queen of Scotland, before she was a queen, that King Henry hated his gold crown, and in the end this guy went insane.
Yeah, the issue is that you have a centripetal capacitance which accelerates metabolism, yes, and mentation rate. And it feels like kind of a buzz. It will accelerate seed growth. You can use it to charge rock powders. In fact, for agriculture. Yes. In fact, what we call it the Veracana effect, which is a hermetic, it's the magic of Hermes quite literally, is that the skill to make a bioactive field called a Shem, the Veracana effect, as Vincent called it, is basically the turning point in civilization. You have all these people running around studying all these stone circles when they're functionally clueless of the science. Mm-hmm. The science is how to build a bioactive field. Right now, all these millions running around from one sacred site to another are like a bunch of bees that used to remember how to make honey, but they now forgot how, so they run around to the memory of the last place there was honey. The honey is bliss. And the fact is, if you don't get bliss, you don't have an immune system, and you don't take memory through death. But it's a science lesson, kids. It's not about running around.
I'm glad you say that, because this is I've been saying that in my teachings that we have to learn to establish that now, which leads me to the next question: is if in the future I will do that in Sedona, when I acquire land, what do you recommend? How do I dowse out the magnetic lines to make a proper magnetic field? Because I think you can set it up. You don't have to go by what's by nature there and find the actual place. You can set it up with rocks and minerals in the correct or perfect geometry to have a central force where you can put your bubble dome, put it this way.
Well, it's really true. Wherever magnetic lines cross, you can start a cathedral or a labyrinth. That's classic geobiology. Complete curriculum, goldenmean.info/geobiology, which is an introduction to the biological architecture. The point is, where magnetic lines cross, you get a centripetal, you get either a dimpling, which is either downward or upward, determining the sex, for example, of the labyrinth you put there. Now, that's the beginning, but then the bubbling, which is a charge envelope, it's magnetic and capacitive. Obviously, the simple way to put it is it needs to look like a rose. So the condensed curriculum is to make a magnetic map of your bed, your house, your backyard, and your city, and they all need to look like a rose. And when they do, for example, the magnetic map of Prague is a rose, very good for lucid dreaming and excellent for attracting tourists, money. It's life force. So that's the short lesson. The longer lesson is what Callahan learned, which was that if those magnetic lines break between two villages, you can predict in advance where war is going to break out, and you can fix it by simply restoring that magnetic map to look like a rose. And it's proven. He did it in Yugoslavia and Ireland. And the other thing that's cool is that when the underground water disappears during war, you can bring it back by doing the same work.
But that explains the experience that a friend of mine had with 3 individuals that he met. They set up rocks, and basically they blew up the toilet in the basement. The water rushed into the house and flooded the basement. He said, you know the geometry, you can call it in.
Another thing is the classic, the shaman will arrange, you want good paramagnetic stone. Piezo, quartz or calcite base is also good. Paramagnetic is good. Diamagnetic is bad.
What is granite? Granite, is that diamagnetic?
Granite will have some of the paramagnetic quality, and it often will have some of the capacitive, which is good. Sandstone would be particularly bad generally, for example. That would be diamagnetic.
Okay.
So churches made out of sandstone are emotionally dead and really bad news. I'm sorry, Wells in UK, but the classic example here is that a proper paramagnetic stone circle or even a boat shape, they placed it around the operating table in a anesthesiology study, and they proved dramatic reduction in surgery recovery time. This was Kareem, which is simple. It was just that when you have a coherent charged bubble, then the connection to your body during anesthesia is much better, which is an introduction to designing the proper hospital and burial ground.
Okay. So when you explained it with the magnets, with the North Pole and the South Pole, as in either, pain reduced, healing slowed down, or healing accelerated and pain increased, would you recommend a device that would balance the poles? So you have a reduced pain, but also a bit accelerated healing? Would that be possible?
There are 3 or 4 really good books on magnets and healing, and they all agree essentially, which is what my original hypothesis was, which was that the difference between magnetic north and south is a predominance of centripetal versus centrifugal magnetic flux lines, which is to say implosive, explosive. And so that's why the true magnetic south, focused on your toothache, will make the pain worse but accelerate the healing rate because it's centripetal.
Okay.
Whereas the magnetic north would reduce the pain but reduce the healing rate. And when you apply this to, we have the imploder.com, which we have had a revolution in agriculture, 68% growth benefit in marijuana, and many other studies. So we have the best magnetic water treatment added vorticity, the imploder.com, based on this principle. And the principle is simple. The one pole pair, if you align them correctly, you can get a balanced germination assistance both for the growth and fruiting phase, where the other pole pair, more centripetal, will be more for the germination phase only. And the other thing that's cool in our imploder is we've taken a complete steel wrapper with accurate lensing to focus the magnetic line in such a way that the opposing poles conjugate, which is to say implode, and make that centripetal force even more powerful. And then we combine the vorticity, and we believe they have the most powerful agricultural water treatment growth benefit in the world.
Oh, excellent. So, quick question to the imploder. When you install that, because I ordered mine, would I put that before the filter or after the filter?
Well, the logic has gone both ways on that question. The imploder benefits from conductive material in the water, because the more piezoelectric the vortex is, the more implosive the capacitance is. It makes the nozzle more effective, which is why we do great in hard water, actually. But the other logic there, however, is that after the filter, the water has lost spin density, so you want to replace that spin density, which is what we do.
Okay.
So we have people on both sides of that argument.
Okay, so but basically, if you want to be safe, then you put it on both ends. I mean, front
Well,
and
yeah,
back.
But really, the conventional thought would be, indeed, that most filters cost your water its spin density, and therefore, to some extent, its solubility effect. And that's exactly what the imploder offers. So normally the imploder would go after the filter, except in special circumstances.
Okay, excellent. So then next question is, how do you train coherence in brain states to achieve these avatar states? And does the Monroe Institute teach that?
Well, it was kind of funny. After Ed Wilson at Monroe Institute discovered that the optimum binaural beat, which actually launched you out of your head, was actually golden ratio in the binaural audio phonon. Ed Wilson there, he saw it was so powerful, he thought it was quite dangerous, and he was right. And so then Ed Wilson came and made a film with me about this, and we've been working on this for many years. And we believe we have the most powerful, and it can be dangerous. And you can download the secret sound at fractalfield.com/negentropic fields. Experiment with what we believe is the world's most powerful binaural beat based on exactly this. Now, that being said, the harmonic recipe is the following.
Okay.
Look, the new information that I have discovered is that the Schumann harmonic cascade, which is how brain waves got invented, by the way,
okay.
The Schumann harmonics of the planet is literally the alpha beta of brain waves, alpha, beta, delta, gamma, etc. And the Schumann harmonic cascade, I have newly discovered, is an accurate phase conjugate implosive negentropic pump wave, precise golden mean ratio multiples of Planck length and time, which also predicts the right brain waves for bliss. So when Korotkov in Russia, who's our good friend, he documented that the kids who were able to learn to see without their eyes with the World Without Blindness project in Russia, the measurement of success was, in fact, they made golden ratio in their brainwaves, golden ratio between the frequency of alpha to beta, et cetera, in a complete cascade based on golden ratio in brainwaves. So I built a device to teach this, to teach bliss. And what we discovered is we can definitely measure success. goldenmean.info/clinical intro. And you will see my bliss tuner, many examples. And the classic example in Australia, you know, the lady before lunch, she's still suffering from trauma, et cetera. She goes out with a shaman and deals with her pain and cries. After lunch, she comes back, hooks up her brainwaves, gets incredible 5 harmonic cascade, gorgeous bliss, you know. So what we can say is, you know, biofeedback doesn't make you have the bliss, but it certainly can tell you when you succeeded. But there's a lot of new things we've learned about that. But the other thing is, you know, when Ingo Swann heated a thermistor with his mind at a distance, which you have to do, by the way, if you're going to be initiated as a shaman with
Ingo Swann is the remote viewer expert, right?
Ingo Swann, yeah. He came back from the backside of the moon rather scared because the bad guys were there, but that's another story. But no, he proved that you can do a flame with your mind, heat a thermistor at a distance, and by the way, he did it through a metal screen.
Okay.
Meaning that no electromagnetic wave conventional made it through, actually, at least not a transverse one. So that's what we learned. You know, I was there for the Cherokee thanks to Dahani Wahoo. You know, you don't get initiated unless you make a flame with your mind. You have to light the fire with your brain, your mind. And that's also the origin of the term Bon-Po, as in bonfire. And that's how the Bon-Po initiations are. You're not initiated unless you made a flame in the mind. So what is a flame in the mind? That's the fun thing.
Okay.
Because it happens to be the solution to fusion.
Okay.
What a flame in the mind is the reason Ingo Swann was able to make the thermistor at a distance respond, heat, even through the metal screen, which complete shield, was that's called a longitudinal wave, a compressional wave. See, transverse waves, they go up and down. Most electromagnetics are mostly transverse. Sound waves are most longitudinal. But to make electromagnetic that's longitudinal, which is, say, compressional wave, which is, say, reaches right into the nucleus, which is, say, flame in the mind, which is how the Germans hid their radar and the big military secret. Oh my gosh. But also, by the way, it is why governments wasted enough money to feed Africa on these atom smashers, because they don't know how to do plasma containment, because they don't know what a flame in the mind is, which is basically reconverging longitudinal to become transverse again by properly making them, which is called phase conjugate. Anyway, the brainwaves of bliss, right and left hemisphere, not only make golden ratio cascades, but they need to be 180 degrees out of phase. And that's how you steer the longitudinal wave at a distance. And by the way, that's exactly the physics of how Luke Skywalker's sword worked and how the Nazi Foo Fighters worked.
So so you're saying that the lightsaber actually is a longitudinal controlled plasma wave.
Exactly. And the spacing between the plasma heating is where you re-interfere the crossed conjugate microwave, which is a huge military secret, but also it's how the mind works, so I don't think it should be a secret.
Yeah. So another question is what you said is when ETs land on planets where the air is not properly fractalized, in your words, you'll age and you'll die because you adapt or you get in resonance with the distortion field of Earth. So since Earth is off its axis, do you think that looking at weather patterns being out of whack, I mean, when I look at Earth and everything that we have, everything looks to me, it's not stabilized. It's not fractalized in a whole. We have certain areas that function a little bit. Most of it, it's cold, hot, it's everything. Do you think that our solar system has a problem from the ancient wars, or is it just Earth that fell?
Well, we need to take that question one little step at a time.
Okay.
When the Sumerian Anunnaki got here,
okay,
their mechanism of aging is the same way they propped up Ariel Sharon and Harkonnen and Dune. They use an artificial field to prevent aging. That is the way they did it. Now, an artificial field that prevents aging is called a phase conjugate dielectric, which is what a pyramid is, by the way, or what a Shem stone is. Mm-hmm. And so naturally, when they arrive here, if they don't have their phase conjugate field to prevent aging, if you leave the Garden of Eden, what happens? You get old.
Yes.
So the Garden of Eden is the name for an electric field, in spite of the fact that I was born in the town of Eden. Eden, place of the Anunnaki, but also it means an age-reducing field effect. That's what paradise is, which is simply say it is a place where charge distribution is optimized, and therefore biology does not decay. It's very simple physics. Now, to say that Earth is defective is a bit oversimplistic there.
Okay.
Actually, the Schumann harmonic cascade of the Earth's low frequencies is precisely phase conjugate to Planck. So I would not describe the Earth as defective. And the fact that the duration of the Earth year and the Venus year is precisely phase conjugate, integral golden ratio to Planck time tells you something. It's negentropic. That's why they're bringing Enki Osiris's body back into Venus, but that's another story. So the point being that they needed to design a field. It was a primary work, Enki Hermes. It's the Hermetic Revolution, which is called Caduceus, which is phase conjugation, which is how you make a bioactive, et cetera, et cetera. So it is very possible to bring this practically into the present. Mm-hmm. Just ask yourself one simple question. We know hundreds, documented cases, yogis lived to be hundreds of years old. But guess what? Ain't one of them ever did it in a modern building. Hello? Because the capacitance is wrong. Oops. So that's what biologic architecture starts with. You start this education with a simple economic suggestion. You determine whether the architect gets a paycheck for designing a building after you measure the rate at which it causes seeds to grow. So most biology schools at universities would not, in fact, know what biology is if you looked at their steel and aluminum buildings, because they're poisonous, because they don't know what life is, so they sure damn well shouldn't be biology teachers. So, in fact, the ability to make a living electric field is 101 to know what life force is. So to prove your biology teacher does not deserve a paycheck, ask him, where did the voltage come from at the top and the bottom of a chicken egg or a pine cone? When they know the answer to that question, then they should start getting a paycheck. Until then,
So you're suggesting basically, which I agree with you there, that the future for the human race is we need to get out of square lodges. We need to get into the harmonious life attracting and life producing building situation. and create places as in, let's say, little pods, let's say a community of 84 people, and no, 64, and create a bubble domes in a holy geometry and create a gigantic field that would be actually life-enhancing and help us in the awakening process. So would you also believe that if that is set up right according to holy geometry, golden fractal, golden ratio, that we will begin to develop supernatural skills faster if we have an entire field where this can be actually harnessed?
Well, and that's exactly right. But what's good is that is the right intro to our international curriculum on biologic architecture, which is the dominant biologic architecture curriculum on the planet now. goldenmean.info/architecture. We've had many international conferences, and we have people working on this in many countries, Prague especially, in Ireland and Australia, all over the world. And it's very simple. The building needs to be implosive capacitively, and that's what will make it attract life. So it boils down to the fact that buildings and cities of the future will look like pine cones and made of similar materials. They will be implosive. They'll be capacitive. And the practical thing is you have a list of materials. And the mythology is now physics that you need biologic materials for buildings because their capacitance, called conjugate, which is the physics of orgone, really, breathes charge and allows your aura to pack and unpack. And that's what a building has to be if you want to be immortal.
Okay, so another question to when the field is fractalized or harmonious, do you think that certain inventors in the past moved to fields where they could channel their inventions much better?
All I can think of is the Cozy Rev Mirror people arriving in Belgium about to install one of their giant cylindrical metal microwave conductors. And the first thing you have to, because Karatkov proved there was telepathy for thousands of miles in the center of these things, it's literally druid phone call physics. The cool thing is they knew ahead of time that they had to measure the magnetic line for nanoteslas because the magnetic line had to cross before you hooked up the radio. So yes, they went to the place where, and the other point would be, as Karatkov so nicely followed the Kogi to where they could make phone calls to their ancestor and measured the capacitance of the air with the GDV, bio-well.eu, which is very simple. If the air is fractal, which is to say charge distribution efficient, that's where they could make phone calls to ancestors. So the point was that we, for the first time, had an electrical engineer's definition of sacred space. Now, if you read at goldenmean.info/architecture, at the top, you see we have 3 different ways now to measure life force in sacred space. And it all boils down to the same thing. If it's a place where a spark has a place to go, you have life. So you take the GDV, for example, and you measure the corner of a metal building, and the capacitance has no place to go. Where you go to a sacred stone circle and a stone forest and, sacred space, and the aura around the spark looks like a rose. And that's the definition of sacred space. Charge distribution efficiency.
So basically, when they say if you go 1 step towards God, he comes 3 steps towards you, is that the, let's say, and let me get this right, that there's an intelligent field that can only find you when you are fractalized enough to welcome that field. Is that correct?
That's good. And I would suggest we just add a bit to that language so you can teach it in the electrical engineering class.
Okay. I'm learning.
More electrical engineering. The electrical engineering, first of all, it's called divine for good reason, means perfect branching. But the electrical engineering is nicely introduced by the famous paper. It's called Alice in Barium Titanate Land, which is barium titanate makes a phase conjugate dielectric field, which is like a plasma bubble that's so self-aware that it finds all other plasma bubbles like itself and gathers. It's self-aware at a distance for, in fact, who is touchable in terms of plasma bubbles, the mind of God. So this introduces the fact that all of spirituality must be taught as physics. Otherwise, we will always have religion wars and disempowering personality worship and miracle worship. I'm sorry, I'm passionate about this. Look, there's no end to religion wars unless we get some physics here. But once people understand the physics, there's no need to fight about it because it's pure principle. You want to talk to the collective unconscious. You want to, phone your ancestors, have the mind of God, be the communion of saints, all that stuff. Go to an electrical engineering class, learn what a phase conjugate dielectric and magnetic is, which is perfect distribution of charge, exactly what Christos meant, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. You get the flavor.
That's what they talk about in the Stargate series, where basically gate wars.
Well, Stargate was also about more than that. The symbols they used actually were the Ophanim-Enochian sigils, and we have now proven the physics, which is hypercubic, vortex plasma domain, implosive symmetry array. So goldenmean.info/Ophanim, you can read the whole physics of Stargate there. In fact, I knew the guy who made the movie, but another story.
Okay, so that's very interesting, because that inspires me to ask you. So in a compact story. What was the governing force before the fall? Because I heard in your teaching, but I want my people to know, you said they were the Ophanim, then they were the Seraphim, and then you said a fraction of that angelic high force said we can do it without the essence of God, basically saying like the Ophanim were more based on let's create from the heart to the outer fields. And there must have been a fraction of the higher forces that where the split came in and said, let's create that from the external and bring it into the heart. So there was a discrepancy in the discussion there. So how can you break that down more clearly? Like, okay, there's a management, you know, what was the major management? Was it the Ophanim and the Seraphim, or who was the top CEO, and how do you see with your research the split took place leading to the Nephilim disaster? I'm like all over the place.
Well, I would like to discriminate a bit between science and mythology here.
Yes.
Up to this moment, I believe I have spoken only the kind of science that electrical engineers should learn, very literally.
Yes.
I have not indulged in mythology to this point.
Okay.
For example, bioactive field theory. Now, the story about the Ophanim, Michael Sarian incorrectly calls them macrobes, but they truly are interstellar plasma being, literally a ball of fire.
Okay.
And their communication is a language of plasma symmetry, which is hypercubic, the Ophanim-Enochian alphabet, which is a superset of the Hebrew Sanskrit, which is tetracubic only. Now, all that being said, the hoary roots of the Ophanim story and the knowledge of how to be an interstellar plasma being, I would refer you to the article, goldenmean.info/Ophanim. However, in terms of the relationship to the immediate Earth history and the fall and the Nephilim story, the mythology is the ancestrals were a high-winged, the Cherokee call them Adawi, Aboriginal call them Valnapa. In Anton Parks, he calls them the life designers, which he calls the Kadistu, which he says is the root of our term caduceus, which I suspect he's right. Mm-hmm. Now, what we do know is that the war in the Pleiades at the time that Enki's family, Anu, ran for their lives from the female-dominated Orion, Queen, Mag, Draco, Uru culture.
Okay.
At that time, the subsequent conflict that broke out on Earth between Enki, who wanted his carefully planned clones to be of long-term value, who's called Ra, as in Abraham, and also called Osiris, and I believe he's also the Persian. At any rate,
so is Enki the one basically that had actually discrepancy with Enlil because he gave away the secret? So they make him the snake? They make him Satan?
Again, I recommend Anton Parks, and this is a big story.
I already ordered the books. It was not easy to get because Amazon.com doesn't have it, but I got it. I got it, so they're coming.
We think that Enlil Yahweh was not Enki's brother, but he was an erroneously created clone whom they tried to destroy. But Enki himself was a clone, and his name Nudibun meant the cloner. And cloning was part of the problem, and not, let's just say at that point. But to try to get back to your original question, the rebellion under the name of Enki, whose other name, incidentally, was Lucifer, and the stone of Lucifer that symbolized the fall, when Lucifer said, "You too can be God," what in the mythology meant was you could take the immortality field inside yourself. This was the conflict and why he was labeled evil by Enlil Yahweh, because Enlil Yahweh was, follow the leader only.
So basically he said, you tell my workforce that they're like me, you give away my secrets and I lose control, so I have a problem with you now.
Well, and it wasn't even about control. I mean, at that point, it had not occurred to... You see, Enlil's lineage did not have the genetic or glandular capacity to have a bliss experience. Whereas... which is sort of like, the joke is sort of like George Bush. But whereas Enki, he specifically chose the species of monkey he did for the genetics because he saw the first hint of compassion, which he'd never seen before in his life. And so there was an emotional evolution possible that was seeded at that moment. And then his mother snuck in some very high-grade DNA, which he thought was unclonable, which was actually the white Draco. Okay. And this has to do with the mystery of the white versus the red Draco. Their blood chemistry was phosphorus mediated, but you have a red and a white phosphorus and a red and white Draco and a red and white dragons, et cetera, et cetera. And so some of that high-end DNA combined with his experiment in high-order glandulars eventually seeded a race that could potentially have a bliss possibility. The Drak, Uru, Enlil, Yahweh could never achieve. And therefore, enable the coherence of plasma required for lucid dreaming and take memory through death, which is what they could not do.
So basically, is that reptilian base, that the reptilian race didn't have the ability to go there? Is that what you're saying?
Well, yes and no. I mean, first of all, I don't want to be talking about, all reptiles and dragons as the bad guy.
No, they're not all bad guys. It's like what happened,
Enki looked like a frog. I mean, in fact, the reason Osiris in Egypt is always green is Enki was a frog. In fact, he's painted that way in Sintra. But it's true that the genetic disaster we call Nephilim resulted from many millennium of cloning and living in artificial metal, which is, we're doing Groundhog Day right now. We're choosing whether a race gets a soul or not. Okay. And the way we make that choice is whether we teach our children how to have a genuine bliss experience, which is going to require some serious hygiene.
So also, would you agree on that the planet is overpopulated because all of these souls that come here that are attracted to this planet and all those that want to help are getting trapped in basically like recycled, that we can't transcend the astral realm. We always go through the same cycle and reincarnate and come back, and we are actually not obligated to come back.
Well, it's true. The gene pool has fractionated its life force, and that is part of the overpopulation problem. But not that couldn't be spiritualized. But examples of those who can get through, as in Bentoff and the other shaman who have been through the heart of the sun, it's about coherence of plasma. It's no abstraction. It's literally about coherence of plasma that determines the only way out of here, which is through the heart of the sun.
Yeah. Also, what I find very interesting is that when you said is when the fall began and we blew up star systems in the Orion conflict, and mentioning Star Wars and Star Trek as all inspired by people that channeled these storylines and they put it into movie scripts, is where can people find actually the picture that you show, the one you're teaching, that you see the is that the galaxy, correct? You see all the arms are fractalized, and one where our story is completely smashed to bits, and you can see it in the picture. Somebody
broke the Orion arm. goldenmean.info/Orion.
Oh, that's what the picture is. So because I want people to go there and really look at it, look at the star map. It's out there, it's known. You don't have to really seek hidden mysteries here. This stuff is smashed to bits. And it's so funny you said we need a chiropractical measure here to correct that and bring the fractals back to order, basically, to restore.
The Reverend Mothers Moggs we worked with the ritual said, if you look up and see stars blowing up, it's us that did it in the Orion sector. And in fact, this is the Draco issue.
Okay, let me see.
And all those Orion star maps.
Yeah, whatever you have to drop it in there. So another question I have is, I want to see what your take is, that I have to bring two cases. One was Stan Romanek, who did a video about his encounters with hybrid children and whatnot. One which he called holy, and I have to cross-reference. In the ancient times, they called those from the stars are holy. Then we have the Buddha effect. If you sit in the field, that everything blooms and blossoms around you, wounds heal, the sick come clear, schizophrenia is healed in that field. I think, or I feel, that ships of a higher force, they run that field. They must be having that in their aura, because where the contact was made in the case of Travis Walton, who was abducted, I think, 30 years ago.
I know the story very well.
Yeah, you heard when he said they went back and checked the readings of the soil and the plants, and it was accelerated. Everything up to 40 times faster, quicker, bigger, better. So
just what I just finished saying, exactly.
Yeah.
And the same centripetal field,
yes,
which is bioactive, can also be lift, actually. And we should explain that in practical terms. When the Vimana, which we have excellent engineering prints for why the Vimana flew in the Vedas, and they were pumping a high inertial Mercury in a spiral on a torus. And but it turns out that there was a solute agent that allowed a fine iron powder to be soluble in the mercury that made it a purple liquid, and that's what then the Germans learned how to do with the Nazi Bell, which flew so well.
Die Glocke.
Yes, and why I mention that now is that is the physics of the Hebrew and Sanskrit alphabet, that same spiral on the torus, which I did the equations for, an animated origin of Hebrew and Sanskrit, goldenmean.info/DNA ring. The point being that if you visualize one of those letters accurately and fill your optical cortex with that angle of the torus, not only, of course, do you sequence the sequence of smoke ring magnetic toroids you blow with your brain cavity to make matter out of light, which is the same physics, you know, how the rabbis made the golem. But the angle you hold that spiral on the torus inside your plasma is the only way you have of navigating in lucid dream and at death, because it is a propulsion mechanism.
Okay, so propulsion, that has, so what would you take on how's propulsion to our interstellar navigation and our blood, and what did we lose?
Well, the reason the right spiral on the torus, and we have the Navier-Stokes equations to prove how you optimize the gravity effect, but the reason the golden spiral on the torus makes gravity or propulsion out of rotation is called optimized translation of vorticity, which is how you teach golden spiral in hydrodynamic physics. The reason is that obviously the rotational inertia becomes linear inertia in a non-destructive way or in a constructive way. And so by putting the spiral accurately on the torus, the amount of propulsion you can make, let me tell you, that the spacecraft you build that way takes its own inertial field with you, which means you don't feel the turn. Hello, we just replaced every form of transport on the planet.
Yeah, I agree. But does that the blood as be an original when we were in our interstellar state, that our blood was the navigational control system to a ship?
Well, that is an interesting way to start the metaphor. Actually, as it was told to me by the chief time empath at Montauk when they ran to try to steal the best Cadillac in the universe, the UFO craft they swiped from, I believe, Aldebaran, they called it the Radial Aldebaran, they said it was a DNA-powered craft. Well, what they meant was, your thought steers, well, what they meant by that was the ability to control the angle of a tornado, faster than the speed of light, what the Guild Navigator in Dune did, immersed in a vat of liquid gold, which works pretty well for conjugating. The point is that the ability to be able to steer at that level requires ability for micromanagement of where the center of the tornado goes at any good moment. So a good way to practice that is if you watch a shaman steering a tornado and watch his bioplasmic streamers embed in that tornado. The moment he becomes the center of gravity of that tornado is actually the moment when he feels its pain.
And when the tornado feels understood, is that when he gives up? When he lets go?
Well, you know, pain is only defined by the fractal that bleeds charge. So the direction in which a charge bleeds is restored when compression is restored, which is what compassion does, restores embedding. And so he gets in the middle of the tornado. And the tornado's pain is basically wherever its charge is bleeding due to broken fractality. That's why the spiral arms of the Orion sector are the same story. So the ability to steer a tornado is the achievement of embedding, and that's where the bioplasmic streamers go. So basically, if you want to travel interstellar, you need a pretty big plasma tornado. Another good way to practice is if you watch all the people who've reported telepathy with ball lightning.
Yeah.
Because they're toroidal.
Okay. So
and conjugate.
Okay. So I have an interesting story. I want to see what your take to that is they studied the Hopis when they do the rain dance. Okay, and they in a myth, but we know it's all science. And what we do is basically you and I, it's like we want to explain to the people where science turned into mythology and where this can actually meet, and we can explain what that actually is. So it's not shrouded in mystery and cloaked in a cloud that in a fire, a ball of fire that speaks to you. Is like they said, okay, to the Hopi Indians, how do you do the rain dance? So the one in the shaman explained to them, and I find that highly, highly interesting. And people miss those stories, and I find that it's so important that we have to share this. They said there are spirits that are little balls of light in the sky, and these spirits need to be inspired to dance the dance with us. So what the Hopi do is, and that's so, I'm getting goosebumps talking about it. They say this is the circle, and they say we need to inspire the spirits to dance 180, 360. And they dance that dance over and over. And said when the spirits agree to dance that dance with us, then it begins to rain. Well, guess what happens to the water molecule when it gets heavy, so it starts to rain? The molecule does that spin.
Well, the opposing directions is introduction of the concept of phase conjugation. But more particularly, we know that children, joyful children barefoot in the mud, can almost always put a hole in the cloud with their mind. Mm-hmm. And the physics is that the centripetal, we know that focused human attention causes electric fields to compress. So we know exactly the physics of why your focused attention can put a hole in a cloud, which is so common. Mm-hmm. It provides a centripetal force to teach the water vapor molecules how to touch, which is to say compress, which is called Christos. The principle of crystallization is the same in magic and Christianity. It is learning to share space.
So that's what Christ or Christos is based on, meaning that
it's only that.
It's not just a figure that everybody prays to an external force that nobody can touch.
It's a pure principle. It's the only thing that ever lived forever was pure principle. So the pure principle Christos that exists, that teaches water vapor molecule how to converge, is to say how to make a centripetal field, which is what's incorrectly labeled orgone. Trevor Constable's weather engineering on the high seas, the capacitor, which he called orgone, which most did the rainmaking, was a 60-degree cone, which is the implosive conjugate angle into a dodeca, which is the physics of the imploder.com. Mm-hmm. So the point is, if you make the field centripetal, you'll make rain. Last little story. I like your story, by the way, and I knew friends with Grandfather Dan and a lot of those Hopi shaman. Yeah. They taught me about the cornmeal calling the rain, by the way. Yeah. And I saw that cornmeal. It would call the wind. And I know why, too. But anyway, the story I wanted to tell you was I had some memories of the Tutankhamun lifetime because I fainted in the gold sarcophagus of Tut in Cairo once. And I realized that, the pharaohs took him and used his blood to make rain. Mm-hmm. And I later figured out how and why that happened.
Okay, you explain that.
After maybe a few hundred generations of pharaohs knowing they would get fired if they can't make rain. So always your ancestors' greatest yearning at the time of death is passed on to their children. So eventually Tutankhamun, as Thutmose means sons of Thoth, which means sons of Tahuti, which means sons of Hermes Enki. So the royal family of Egypt is literally the sons of Hermes by name. And so a couple hundred generations of that, and Tutankhamun, what power did he have? So the point would be that after I discovered my Kundalini fired up, I discovered I could often make rain. By the way, I never learned how to stop it. But many, many stories about that. But the physics of why Kundalini makes rain is instructive. Okay. It's a massive low-frequency to high plasma conjugate coherence phenomenon, immensely centripetal, and which is why Kundalini aficionados are called great masks of God in Iceland in the book on the biomechanics of Kundalini by Bentoff. Also, Lisa Nella's book on transcendence or psychosis, origin of Kundalini.
Okay, then I have another question is, you say that phase conjugate places or sacred spaces increase the metabolism, like enhance everything that you have to process. How can one, because especially in the case here in Sedona, we have people that can't get used to it, that everything is accelerated here, and many that I've witnessed that lost literally their mind because they couldn't hold center of themselves and they're getting fragmented and losing themselves in these fields because they're not. It's like if you haven't been in a decompression chamber long enough.
I've been to Sedona hundreds of times. I know the story. Sure.
So what do you suggest to people that come to places like Sedona, I mean, I've managed it. It took me like a year and a half to really centralize because everything is so intense here. And to eat, like my eating habit and everything has changed here. I have to eat lighter. I have to ground myself. And really, I'm forced to practice, how do you say,
Grounding.
a mental hygiene. To keep my thoughts clear, keep my intentions clear, because everything backfires here in Sedona, like directly. Like karma is like behind you, wrong move, and it's like, oops, and you're like, oh, okay, wrong direction here. So what do you recommend to people how to get a handle on their surfboard that they don't trip or turn into literally assholes or rob people here and totally go out of control in these spaces?
Well, it is interesting. The indigenous wisdom, whether it's Sedona or Mount Wollumbin, Mount Warning in Australia, same story. The indigenous wisdom was always, these sacred sites are places for ritual and for community meetings, but you should never live there. That was there.
Okay.
That is there. They were clear on that. And there's some wisdom there. I mean, you see, all metabolic acceleration is not beneficial. And accelerating metabolism, if you're not ready for it, it's just like spinning a tornado faster than it's balanced for, or spinning a top faster than it's balanced for.
Okay.
And so adding spin density can be useful, but too much added spin density if you're not ready, obviously. So, for example, you don't want to sleep in a gold sarcophagus. You don't want to sleep in a pyramid. Because accelerated metabolism is for certain specific functions.
So you're saying that all Sedona is a golden pyramid? Everything here is a golden sarcophagus? Or are there areas where it's like... I mean, I know myself, my experience is like... I live in a place now where it's a little bit less dense. I mean, not less dense, like less high of that activity that everything accelerates so fast. But then there's areas where everything is really, really like where you're in the middle of a swirl and you think you're going crazy in the house and water lines meet and whatnot. So would you say that there are areas in and around Sedona where it is? I mean, I have a good living here. I'm actually very, very, very happy and very blessed to be here and where I'm at. So, but not everybody can handle it.
My Sedona stories. I mean. The Ophanim Enochian ritual we did there at Red Rocks in Sedona changed the lives of everyone. And we saw tornadoes the size of continents being steered. I mean, clearly, you can get some leverage on tornadoes, there's no question about that. My other story of Sedona, I don't know if I should say this, but, the shaman friend Robert A. there in Sedona, when he was doing his calls there, that's what triggered, we think, were the Phoenix Lights called the UFOs. This whole story, it all started there. So, it's a charged, dense environment because of the piezoelectric nature, the canyons, etc., which is useful and bioactive and should be treated with respect.
Yes.
But the point would be that you can't do accelerated mentation rate until you get your top spinning with great balance.
Yeah. I mean, I realize what Sedona does to me is like it puts you in your purpose. Like you can't, if you have a certain cosmic purpose in your cellular matrix, I believe you have to go for that. And if you don't do it, it's really, really, really difficult for you to find your purpose. So that's where Sedona helped me. I'm totally in what I need to do. The downloads that I get, I couldn't get that. I lived in Berlin before. I'm half German. I speak that fluent. And in Berlin, it was very difficult. And even the contacts that I had, I was communicated. It's very difficult to access you here because of that field. And it was suggested for what I'm doing and what I'm creating to move here, which is... I had no idea that Sedona even existed. I didn't even know of that place. And when I landed, like a lot of things fell into place and made snap for me. So for me, it's recalibrating. And and it's like a high Jedi school for me here,
And the raising of the Jed was a conjugate flame.
Aha. That's what this Jedi comes from, or what they call it, raising the Jed. Let me see. What else do we have here? Yeah, we said we went over that. Yeah, we basically have anything that you like to share that people need to know, which is actually urgent, that we really get in gear and get this done now and get a handle on. We need to create peace, and we need to create those peace fields. What do you recommend as what people should do? Mental hygiene, astral hygiene, practice lucid dreaming. Get into learning the mechanics. Like I'm learning now how to steer my body in OBE. And interestingly is that you mentioned that how many organs of perception can you take with you? Because sometimes I can't smell. sometimes I can't hear, and sometimes I'm just feeling, and I'm like a blind mouse up there, and I'm like, why is this all so difficult to get a lineup that I have my five senses with me so I can steer and control my body when I'm in OBE?
You're right, and it is that navigational ability that's determined by the coherence of your aura, which was called Ka, boat to the underworld in Egypt, which is the amount of coherence, how you know if you're a Catholic or a Cathar.
Okay.
And developing that coherence of the aura means your spiritual practice, your bliss practice. I mean, a few things that I might like to suggest, perhaps in closing, would be that multiple sources do really indicate that our civilization is going to go through some stress points in the next couple of years,
yes,
and that preparations really are in order. And this is the last chance the next year or two probably you have to find your community and get a bit more self-sufficient. I think that would be my humble opinion. And another thing I'd like to point out is actually we now know precisely what to do to the Schumann harmonic cascade, phase conjugate pump wave, to bring weather and atmosphere out of chaos. Okay. We know quite literally the absolute physics for how to perfect a pump wave for the way out of chaos for any wave system. And the fact that the Schumann harmonic series, the actual frequency of the Schumann, precisely fit that equation almost exactly, is absolute proof that the Earth is trying to be a phase conjugate pump wave, which is to say that Earth is trying to be negentropic. So anybody that runs around saying that climate's going to chaos and atmosphere is going to chaos and we don't know what to do about it is now officially proven wrong because we do know what to do about it. You can take that harmonic series, place it at the right sites, improve, fix the phase conjugate pump wave, and bring every wave oscillator out of chaos, including planet climate, planet atmosphere. And a good way to start perhaps might be to start with the electric field, which is your children's classroom.
Yeah.
We know the attention span is destroyed when you put these fluorescent lights in there because the frequencies are wrong. You put sunlight in, you get attention span. The physics is it's the same harmonic series. Guess what? You can make attention by making the right field effect.
So would you suggest like natural light bulbs?
Well, what was called full spectrum lighting which is proven to create attention span. It's well known, John Ott book, Health and Light. But the point is that the reason the imitation of sunlight creates attention is because the harmonics there, stellations of hydrogen, I proved hydrogen was golden ratio in its radii. Mm-hmm. So the hydrogen frequencies are conjugate and therefore make attention possible.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Now, they have proven that with cases where they had took kids out of the classroom and held class at the beach in Hawaii and had them run around with their feet in the sand all day. And they said that the attention span increased by up to 250%.
Exactly. Or, in a circle of sacred trees or wherever any place where the capacitance is centripetal. The point is, for the first time, thanks to me, yes, we now have the exact frequency recipe for how to do that. In the capacitive, in the magnetic, in the optical, it's the same equation.
Mm-hmm. So to that, like to close it, I want to see, I have a pretty weird question. It's like, what do you suggest when people are stuck in the astral realm, in the illusion of self-projection, and they don't understand that when you're in OBE, you can transcend that? What would you suggest to people like that they don't fall for the trickery of false god and false deity? Because I have witnessed a lot of people here that they can give me a lot of theories and a lot of fancy storylines that have zero application in this life. They sound fantastic and inspiring, but they can't bring it into their life. They remain asshole, but they claim they have to listen to this and this and this and this dude. How can you get out of this illusion of being stuck in the astral realm?
I don't know why. I just can't help but thinking about Sean Connery in the movie Highlander. Okay. In the turning point when they convinced him that you cannot die. That was a turning point. Okay. But the immortality of the tornado means the invincible part of you is that pure principle. Yes. So if you identify, to drop the dent in the tornado with the phi angle, when you identify with that, the tornado is actually implosive and therefore cannot die. So the true source of your power, just like the true source of any healer, is to find the inertia of the collective mind. And that's what is the wind beneath your wings. So
that explains, to make this, to end this in a very nice way, the intention of how's this? If you have a pure intention, that luck comes to you because they have wave patterns that are connected to your pure intent. Is that correct?
Yeah, it's beautiful, and essence is to recognize the physics of exactly what we call pure intention, being obviously the perfectly shareable wave, which is when you feel pure principle, you feel something that serves all of life, that's pure survival memory for all of the gene pool. That's called pure intention. In this power spectrum of EKG, which I invented the concept of heart coherence because I invented the mathematics of how to measure it, literally measures pure intention. It's obviously the climax form of coherence is conjugate, which is why holograms exist, because the fractal, anyway, et cetera, et cetera. Non-destructive compression is what's at the center of pure intention. So that is a burning fountain.
Excellent. Yeah. What I want to do is want to send you one of my keys. That's what I sell online, and I'm finding out, and probably with a little bit of help of you, what is it that I'm doing, that I'm working with optical phase conjugation, because this is based on photonics and bions and bionically enhancing cell communication. And I had a case where somebody said that he would wear this and friends around him, it was like an exorcism. The weirdness would come out. Why would you explain that is the case, that if you get into a phase conjugate field, that and you have a little bit of a Jekyll and Hyde thing going on, that Dr. Jekyll pops up, until you exercise that out? Why is that?
Well, it's the same reason that if you have bliss in your aura, you will have no problem with parasites in your stomach or in your aura, because everything which is parasitic can't withstand the actual flame of implosion, which is that burning fountain we spoke about. So the more broad spectral conjugation, the more perfect the flame. So, for example, if you combine the conjugate optics with dielectrics or magnetics there, it will be even more broad spectral and more effective. And that's exactly what the Priori device is. And that's what a rejuvenation field is. It's the perfect blue flame, literally.
That's what Bovis has proven when he put parasites in the center of the King's chamber, and the parasites either died and mummified and went inert, or roaches or rats or rodents, they all fled the scene, like they exploded away from the center. They couldn't stand staying there.
Which is, they served mummy powder in every pharmacy in Europe for 300 years, and we thought it was the gold powder content, which it was, but it wasn't because they were eating so much gold powder, because it was an alchemy in the tissue from the natron, which actually implosively converts the body to gold, which is what is conjugate enough to be distributed and therefore enter immortality.
Yeah, so one last question is, they tested time in these phase conjugate fields, and they took several clocks and digital clocks and put them, there's a chamber under the King's chamber, which they call like the no chamber or the no zone. And my question is, why is it that all the clocks they put in there basically went all out of phase? All one slow, one fast, half speed, half time, everything was out of control. Does that mean the 1260 time code is actually unfractalized and it's crap? It's not the right timing?
The only definition of fractality in time is my new book, fractalfield.com.
Well, I'll get into that.
Planck time, exponent, and golden ratio. And if you do that right, you have phase conjugate. In optics, time reversal is well documented. And of course, you'd have some time effect there. Time is only rotation. Time is only a name for the period of rotation. Rotation is what creates mass and time. And so the relative rotation creates the embedding of all synchronicity. And if it's conjugate, then you have synchronicity. Point being that you can only time reverse to a more ordered state. Physics is clear. You can take rusted steel back to good steel, but not the reverse. So if you want to time reverse your body, you better have a more ordered state to go back to.
So meaning like if you have a non-ordered state in your youth, I'm 45, let's say when I was 21, I wasn't there, so I couldn't go there, because that's by my physics won't allow me to go there, basically.
Although they called it time reversal in phase conjugate optics, what they only really meant was neg entropy, which means you ain't going back to disorder. You can only go back to order.
Okay. So,
and the Priori device, which we will be selling, and by the way, it is legal to sell a field effect that is time reversal. So it ain't legal to heal people. 10,000 people heal the cancer with Priori, but it is legal to sell time reversal. So I'm warning you, governments of the world, we're coming.
They can't stop it. We're in 1,000 different places, and everybody's getting together and working this out. So I'm going to hit the stop button now, but I have a question when we're off camera.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. Thanks you for having you.